The rain-slicked highway twisted like a serpent under the sodium glow of distant lamps, the kind of night where the world blurred into shadows, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and exhaust. Far from the glittering spires of the city, where penthouses overlooked the river and deals were sealed in smoke-filled back rooms, this stretch of road belonged to the forgotten. Truckers hauling illicit cargo, ghosts fleeing their paths, and the occasional convoy of black SUVs cutting through the downpour like knives. Inside one such vehicle, a sleek Lincoln Navigator, Marco Rossi gripped the wheel with knuckles white as bone. He was a man built from the underbelly of the city, broad-shouldered, scarred from old turf wars, his dark eyes always scanning for the next threat. At 45, Marco ruled the docks with an iron fist wrapped in velvet, shipping manifests doctored, rival shipments sunk in the river, loyalties bought with whispers or bullets. But tonight, his mind wasn't on the ledger of debts or the burner phone buzzing in his pocket. It was on the twins. They were his weakness, those boys, Luca and Leo. Barely 10, orphaned scraps he'd pulled from the streets 2 years back after their mother, a low-level courier, overdosed in a safe house. Marco had seen something in them, that feral spark, the way they moved in sync, like shadows sharing a single breath. He'd given them a home, a name, a code. Never harm the innocent. Keep your vows. But the city had a way of testing legacies, and whispers of betrayal had been circling his crew like vultures. The crash came without warning. A semi-truck, its brakes likely sabotaged. Marco would bet on that later. Swerved from the fog line, slamming into the navigator's flank with a screech of metal and shattering glass. The world tilted, spun, the rain pounding like gunfire on the crumpling roof. Marco's last coherent thought was of the boys, asleep in the back, their small forms buckled in amid the chaos. Then darkness swallowed him, his chest seizing, breath ragged and failing as the vehicle skidded to a halt against a guardrail, half in the ditch, headlights flickering like dying stars. The river loomed nearby, its black waters churning under the storm, carrying the faint rot of industrial runoff and forgotten secrets. This was no man's land, miles from the nearest hospital, where ambulances took too long and cops asked too many questions. The truck driver, a ghost himself, had already fled into the night, leaving the wreckage steaming in the downpour. It was the twins who stirred first. Luca blinked awake to the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of smoke from the engine. His twin, Leo, was already moving, unbuckling with trembling fingers, his face smeared with a cut above his eye. They were homeless once, surviving on scraps in alleyways, dodging the gangs that preyed on kids like them. But Marco had changed that. Now, in the upside-down world of the SUV, instinct kicked in. "Marco," Luca whispered, voice cracking as he crawled over the seats, rain leaking through the cracked windshield. The boss's head lolled against the deflated airbag, his shirt soaked red, chest still. Leo reached him first, small hands pressing against Marco's neck, feeling for the pulse that fluttered weak and erratic. "He's not breathing," Leo said, eyes wide but steady. They'd learned this in the safe houses, basic triage from the cruise medic, the kind of knowledge that came with living on the edge. CPR, don't panic. But panic clawed at them anyway. The storm howling outside, distant thunder masking the hum of an approaching engine that might be friend or foe. Luca nodded, positioning himself. 1, 2. They worked in rhythm, just like always. Leo tilting Marco's head back, clearing the airway, slick with blood and rain. Luca interlocking his fingers, pressing down on the sternum with all the force his skinny arms could muster. The compressions were clumsy at first, the car rocking slightly in the wind, but they didn't stop. 15 pushes, 2 breaths, Marco's lips cold under Luca's makeshift seal. The boys' world narrowed to this. The boss's unresponsive form, the wet slap of their hands, the river's murmur promising oblivion if they failed. Minutes stretched like hours. Leo's arms burned, but he kept counting under his breath, eyes darting to the road. Headlights pierced the gloom, not cops, Too sleek for that. A rival crew? The betrayal rumors Marco had dismissed? No time. Again, Luca urged, swapping places seamlessly. Their bond, a silent anchor in the chaos. Then, a gasp. A ragged, wet inhale that cut through the storm. Marco's chest heaved, eyes fluttering open to the inverted cabin, the twins' faces hovering like worried angels. He coughed, tasting copper, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun in his holster, empty, lost in the wreck. Boys? His voice was gravel, but alive. The pulse under Luca's fingers steadied, erratic, but there. They helped him out, the three of them stumbling into the rain, Marco leaning heavy on their shoulders. The riverbank squelched underfoot, mud sucking at their shoes, the chill seeping through soaked clothes. Marco scanned the darkness, instincts firing despite the pain lancing his ribs, cracked, maybe worse. The approaching vehicle slowed, tires hissing on wet pavement. One of his? Or the ones who'd rigged the truck? Get us out, Marco rasped, pulling the twins close, his code kicking in. Protect the innocent, even if it cost him everything. But as the car pulled up, its tinted windows revealing nothing, a new fear gnawed. Who had watched this crash unfold, and why hadn't they intervened sooner? The twins exchanged a glance, their miracle hanging by a thread, as the door opened to shadows within. The rain hammered the roof of the black Mercedes like a relentless interrogation, its wipers slashing back and forth in futile rhythm. Vito, Marco's right-hand man for 15 years, leaned out the driver's window, his face a mask of weathered leather under the brim of a soaked fedora. "Boss?" he barked, eyes flicking to the twins supporting Marco's weight. No questions, no panic, just the clipped efficiency of a man who'd pulled bodies from worse wrecks. He killed the engine, popped the trunk for a blanket, and in seconds, they were bundled inside, the door sealing out the storm with a solid thunk. Marco slumped against the leather seat, breath shallow and ragged, each inhale a knife twist in his ribs. The twins flanked him, Luca wiping blood from Marco's brow with the hem of his shirt, Leo scanning the road through fogged glass. The Mercedes peeled away, tires hydroplaning briefly on the slick highway before finding grip, heading not toward the city's sterile hospitals. Too many eyes, too many forms, but to the fringes, where the river met the docks in a maze of rusting cranes and shadowed warehouses. The air inside carried the faint tang of gun oil from Vito's shoulder holster and the metallic bite of Marco's blood. "You two saved my ass," Marco muttered, his voice a gravel scrape. He squeezed Luca's knee, then Leo's, the gesture heavy with unspoken vows. The boys nodded, silent, their small frames tense against the hum of the engine. They'd been invisible once, huddled in cardboard under bridges, scavenging for food amid the river's refuse. Marco had seen potential in their unbreakable sink, plucked them from that life like embers from ash. Now, that debt bound them tighter than blood. Vito glanced in the rear view, his jaw set. "Crash wasn't clean, boss. That rig, plates from a shell company out of Jersey. I got a guy checking manifests, but..." He trailed off, the unspoken hanging. Betrayal. Marco's crew handled the dock's undercurrent. Cocaine in coffee crates, guns in engine blocks. But rivals from the east had been probing, testing the edges of his territory. A sabotaged brake line? That screamed inside job. Someone who'd known the convoy's route. The clinic emerged from the gloom like a forgotten outpost. A low brick building tucked behind a chain-link fence. Its sign faded to Riverside Urgent Care. But everyone knew it for what it was, a front for the syndicate's wounds. No neon, just the sodium buzz of security lights cutting through the downpour, illuminating puddles that reflected the churning river beyond. Vito punched a code into the gate, 4 digits, changed weekly, and they rolled inside, the gravel crunching under tires. Elena Vasquez was waiting, her white coat stark against the dim fluorescence of the exam room. Mid-30s, sharp-featured with dark hair pulled into a practical bun. She moved like someone who'd stitched up more than her share of bullet holes. Marco had pulled her family from a deportation raid years back, a favor traded for discretion. No questions on provenance, no reports to the board. Tonight, her hands were steady as she helped transfer him to the gurney, the antiseptic sting cutting through the rain's damp rot. Cracked ribs, possible pneumothorax. She assessed coolly, her gloved fingers probing Marco's chest, while Luca and Leo hovered in the corner, eyes wide but unblinking. The room hummed with the whir of monitors, the beep of a heart rate steadying to a stubborn rhythm. She hooked up an IV, saline, painkillers, nothing traceable, her movements precise, like defusing a bomb. You stopped breathing. Lucky the boys knew what to do. Marco winced as she taped sensors to his skin, the adhesive pulling at damp hair. Luck's got nothing to do with it. Their family. His gaze met hers, a flicker of something deeper, gratitude laced with the possessiveness of a man who collected loyalties like currency. Elena had always kept her distance, her ethics a fragile wall against the world he'd built. But debts had a way of blurring lines, and tonight, with thunder rattling the windows, that wall felt thinner. Vito paced the hallway, burner phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low murmur into the static. Yeah, secure the site. Tow it quiet. No cops. He hung up, re-entering with a canvas bag from the Mercedes, Marco's effects, sodden but intact. A wallet, keys, and a slim ledger, discreet, leather-bound, its pages listing shipments and debts in coded shorthand. As Elena worked, Vito spread the contents on a side table, the twins inching closer. Luca's fingers brushed a scrap of paper tucked in the wallet's fold, a receipt from a mechanic's shop, dated yesterday, for brake fluid flush. Odd. Marco never trusted outsiders with the fleet. Elena's scissors snipped away Marco's shirt, revealing bruises blooming like ink on his torso. This wasn't just a crash, she said, not looking up, her tone clinical but edged. Shrapnel patterns suggest the impact was forced. You need imaging, but we can't risk the hospital. She glanced at the boys, her expression softening fractionally. You two, sit. You've done enough heroics for one night. Leo shook his head, fists clenched. We stay. Their voices were small but fierce, an echo of the streets that had forged them. Marco coughed, managing a half smile. Let 'em. They're my shadows. But unease coiled in his gut, sharper than the pain. Vito's phone buzzed again. Another burner, the kind that self-destructed after 3 calls. He stepped out, but not before the twins caught a snippet. Watch the whole thing. From the ridge. The river's roar filtered through the vents, a constant undercurrent to the clinic's sterile hush. Elena finished stabilizing him, wheeling in a portable X-ray that cast long shadows across the linoleum. As the machine whirred to life, Marco's eyes met hers again, holding longer this time. You owe me nothing after this, he said quietly, the words a test. She paused, siren in hand. Debts end when they're paid, but the boys, they're innocent in this mess. Outside, the storm eased to a drizzle, but the darkness pressed closer, headlights sweeping the fence line from a distant road. Vito burst back in, face ashen. Perimeter breach. Someone tripped the outer sensor. Could be nothing, a stray dog in the rain, or eyes on us. Marco's hand tightened on the gurney rail, the ledger's secrets burning in his mind. The twins exchanged a look, their miracle from the wreck now shadowed by a deeper threat. Who had lingered on that ridge, and what had they seen in the boys that made them targets too? The clinic's fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects, casting stark pools of white over the exam room's scuffed linoleum. Marco lay on the gurney, his chest bandaged tight under a fresh shirt Vito had pulled from the supply closet, the fabric stiff and smelling faintly of bleach. The portable X-ray hummed in the corner, its images flickering on a cracked monitor. Fractures spiderwebbing his ribs, a shadow on his lung that Elena swore wasn't collapsed yet. But the real fracture was in the air, thick with the river's damp chill seeping through the vents, mingling with the sharp tang of iodine and the low thrum of a generator outside. Vito holstered his phone, his broad frame filling the doorway like a barricade. "False alarm on the sensor," he said, but his eyes said otherwise, darting to the shadowed windows, where rain-smeared glass distorted the fence line. "Probably a raccoon, boss, but I'm doubling the watch. 2 men on the roof, one circling the perimeter with night vision." He didn't mention the ridge again, but the word hung unspoken, a ghost from the crash site. Marco nodded, wincing as he shifted, his hand finding Luca's shoulder. The boy stood rigid, his small face pale under the cut that's been cleaned but not stitched. Too minor for Elena's needle, she'd said. "Get the ledger," Marco rasped, voice laced with the gravel of painkillers. Vito retrieved it from the side table, the leather cover cool and worn, its pages dog-eared from nights of clandestine accounting. Marco flipped it open with deliberate slowness, the twins leaning in, their breaths sinking like always. Entries blurred in the dim light. Shipments of auto parts from the Jersey docks, coded payments to a mechanic named Rizzo, brake fluid flushes, tire rotations. The receipt from Luca's earlier brush fit like a puzzle piece. Dated yesterday, signed in Rizzo's scrawl, but Marco's fleet used in-house techs. No outsiders. "This Rizzo, he's one of ours?" Marco asked, eyes narrowing. Vito shook his head, rubbing his stubbled jaw. "Was. Low level, handles overflow. But he vanished last week. Said he had a sick kid in Philly. I bought it then." The room fell quiet, save for the distant patter of rain on the roof, the kind that masked footsteps or the slide of a knife. Elena paused in her charting, pen hovering over the clipboard, her dark eyes flicking between them. She'd seen this dance before, debts turning to daggers, loyalties fraying like old rope. "If it's sabotage," she said softly, "you need to move. This place isn't fortified for a siege." Marco met her gaze, the intensity there cutting through the haze of meds. Elena had always been his quiet anchor, pulled from the brink of losing her green card years ago, now repaying in stitches and silence. But tonight, with the twins' miracle fresh in his mind, something shifted. A possessiveness born not of control, but of the raw fear of loss. The boys had breathed life back into him on that rain-lashed road. Now, he owed them a fortress. "We're not running blind," he said. "Vito, call in the convoy. Safe house by the warehouses, full escort." The twins exchanged a glance, Leo's fingers twitching as if ready to bolt. They'd tasted safety under Marco's roof, but the street's lessons lingered. Trust was a luxury, betrayal a shadow that followed. Luca spoke first, voice steady despite the tremor. "What about Rizzo? If he set the truck?" He trailed off, but Marco understood. The boy was piecing it together, his street-sharp mind spotting the tells, the truck's jersey plates matching a ledger entry for a reroute last month, whispers of East Side rivals sniffing at the docks. "Smart kid," Marco murmured, ruffling Luca's damp hair. Pride swelled, mixed with the ache of what he'd dragged them into. The code he'd drilled into them, never harm the innocent, keep vows even when they burned, now tested him. These boys weren't pawns. They were his legacy, forged from the ashes of his own losses. A brother gunned down in a turf skirmish, a wife who walked away from the blood money. Vito stepped out to make the call, his boots echoing down the hall, leaving the room to the 4 of them. Elena busied herself with the IV drip, adjusting the flow with clinical precision. But her mind raced. Working the fringes meant choices. Stitch the wound or report it. Save the man or save her conscience. Marco's world pulled like a riptide, and the twins, those wide-eyed survivors, tugged at something maternal she'd buried under layers of independence. "You can't keep them in this," she said, low enough for only him to hear. "They're kids, not soldiers." His hand caught her wrist, gentle but unyielding, the warmth of his skin a contrast to the room's chill. "They're mine, and so's the debt I owe you." The words hung, charged, her pulse quickening under his touch. Autonomy warred with the pull of his code, the way he shielded without caging. Outside, tires crunched on gravel, Vito's men arriving early, engines idling like watchful beasts. But as Elena pulled away, a flicker caught her eye. Vito's phone, left on the table, its screen lighting with an incoming text. She glanced at Marco, then the boys, who were absorbed in the ledger. The message preview glowed. Ridge confirmed, twin spotted, extract or eliminate. Her breath caught, the antiseptic air turning sour. Vito burst back in, oblivious, barking orders. "Convoy's 5 out. We roll now." Marco rose unsteadily, waving off help, his arm around Leo. The group moved toward the back exit, the river's murmur growing louder, a siren song of hidden currents. Elena lagged, pocketing the phone subtly, her ethics demanding one more choice. As the door swung open to the drizzling night, headlights pierced the fog from the wrong direction. Not the convoy, but a single sedan, slowing at the fence. Vito cursed, drawing his piece. The twins froze, their miracle from the crash now a beacon for shadows. Who had sent that text, and how deep did the betrayal run in Marco's empire? If you're enjoying this story so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The sedan's headlights sliced through the drizzle like accusatory fingers, pinning the clinic's backlot in a harsh glare. Gravel popped under its tires as it nosed closer to the fence. Engine purring low, the kind of sound that blended with the river's restless churn, but set every nerve on edge. Vito's hand tightened on his pistol, the metal cool against his palm, rain beating on the barrel as he stepped forward, using the doorframe for cover. "Stay inside," he growled over his shoulder, but Marco was already moving, half dragging Leo with him toward the Mercedes, Luca glued to his other side. Elena clutched Vito's phone in her coat pocket, the weight of it burning like contraband. The text's words echoed in her mind: extract or eliminate. Cold calculus aimed at the boys who'd just clawed a man back from death. Her ethics, that stubborn core she'd guarded through years of patching syndicate wounds, screamed to act. But autonomy clashed with the debt. Marco's pull on her life, the twins' wide-eyed trust. She followed the group, her shoes slipping on the wet linoleum threshold, the night air slapping her face with river mist and the faint oily reek of idling exhaust. "Wrong convoy," Vito muttered, sighting down the gun's length. The sedan's door creaked open, a figure unfolding, stocky, hooded, face obscured by shadow and rain. No rush, no aggression, just a deliberate step toward the gate, hands visible and empty. "Vito, it's me! Rizzo!" the man called, voice muffled but familiar, laced with the Jersey twang from the ledger's notes. The mechanic, the ghost who'd vanished. Marco froze mid-stride, his bandaged ribs protesting the sudden halt, breath hitching in the damp cold. The twins pressed closer, Leo's small hand fisting Marco's jacket, Luca's eyes darting to the fence like he was mapping escape routes from their old alley days. "Rizzo?" Marco echoed, low and lethal, the pain in his voice sharpening it to a blade. Betrayal's scent hung thicker than the rain, brake jobs, shell companies, a ridge watcher. If this was the inside man, the crash's architect, he'd walked right into the lion's den. Vito didn't lower his weapon. "You got 3 seconds to explain why you're not in Philly with your kid." The figure, Rizzo, raised his hands higher, rain streaming down his hood like tears. "Sick kid was cover. Eastsiders grabbed me, made me rig the rig. Said they'd ice the family if I didn't. Boss, I swear, I'm here to square it." His eyes flicked to the Mercedes, then the clinic door, lingering on the twins a beat too long. Elena's pulse spiked. That glance, subtle but off, like a guard rotation slipping out of sync. Marco waved Vito down, instincts warring with caution. The code, vows kept under pressure, demanded a hearing, but the boy's miracle freshened every suspicion. Talk fast, and drop the hood. Rizzo complied, revealing a face pocked with fresh bruises, one eye swelling purple under the security light's sodium hum. He glanced at the ledger peeking from Marco's pocket, then back up. They knew your route, tapped a burner in the crew. I flushed the brakes on the semi, but the navigator. That was them forcing the swerve. From the ridge, spotter with binoculars, relaying to the driver. The river gurgled nearby, swallowing secrets in its current, the dock's distant cranes groaning like weary sentinels. Elena edged forward, her mind racing through institutional limits. No cameras here, just Vito's men, circling with radios crackling static. She slipped the phone into her pocket deeper, weighing exposure. If Rizzo was clean, he'd confirm the text's source. If not, he'd bury it. "Who are they?" she interjected, voice steady despite the chill seeping through her coat. Rizzo's gaze snapped to her, surprise flickering. The dock out of her white coat silo. "Caruso's crew. East docks. Been buying off our guys. Low level like me. They want the manifests, the river routes." He nodded toward the twins, his behavioral tell slipping. A softening. Almost paternal. "Saw the kids pull you out. Miracle that. But they're marked now. Caruso's got a hard-on for leverage. Innocents make the best bait." Marco's arm tightened around Luca, possessiveness flaring like a struck match. The boys weren't tools. They were his redemption, shadows he'd claimed from the street's maw. Fear coiled in his gut, loyalty to his code tested by this web of turncoats. Vito holstered his piece halfway, scanning the tree line. "Convoy's close. 2 minutes. You ride with us or eat lead." Rizzo hesitated, then nodded, sliding into the sedan's passenger seat. No, wait. He was circling to the driver's side, keys jangling. Too smooth, Elena thought, her independence urging a warning. But before she could speak, tires screeched from the access road. The real convoy. 3 black SUVs barreling through the gate. Lights off, but engines roaring like thunder. Chaos erupted in heartbeats. Rizzo gunned his sedan, not fleeing but lunging forward, ramming the fence in a shower of sparks and chain link. Gunfire cracked, Vito's men from the roof, muzzle flashes lighting the rain like fireworks. Bullets pinged off the sedan's frame as it fishtailed away, taillights vanishing into the fog-shrouded road toward the warehouses. "Traitor!" Marco bellowed, shoving the twins into the Mercedes, Elena piling in after. Vito jumped behind the wheel, the door slamming as the convoy reformed, peeling out in a gravel spray. The chase blurred the world into streaks of wet blacktop and looming silos, the river's edge a treacherous companion on their left. Marco's breath came in shallow bursts, ribs screaming, but his focus locked on the ledger in his lap. Rizzo's slip, mentioning the spotter. The marking of the twins fit the text Elena had glimpsed. She met his eyes in the rear view's reflection, her hand brushing his as she passed the phone. "From his burner," she whispered, the screen dark but damning. "It's deeper than one man." Vito swerved to avoid a pothole, radio buzzing, lost visual on the sedan, forked toward the tunnels. The air thickened with tension, the hum of tires underscoring the pull between trust and suspicion. Marco pocketed the phone, his vow hardening. Protect the family, even if it meant burning the empire to ash. The twins huddled close, their sync unbroken, but Leo's whisper cut through. "He looked at us wrong. Like he knew." As the convoy plunged into the warehouse district's maze, shadowed hulks and sodium-lit alleys, headlights flickered in the mirrors, distant but gaining. Was Rizzo alone, or had the East Siders anticipated the extraction, jamming the exits with their own shadows? The warehouse district unfolded like a labyrinth of steel and shadow, its hulking silhouettes etched against the sodium haze of scattered lamps. Rain-slicked alleys twisted between rusted shipping containers, and towering pallets of forgotten cargo, the air thick with the brine of the river and the faint, acrid tang of diesel from idling generators. The convoy's lead SUV cut through the maze, tires hissing on puddles that mirrored the flickering lights overhead, while Vito's Mercedes trailed close, its headlights bouncing off graffiti-scarred walls. Marco gripped the door handle, every jolt sending fire through his bandaged ribs, but his eyes stayed fixed on the rear view, those pursuing lights, faint but persistent, weaving like predators in the fog. "They're hanging back," Vito said, voice a low rumble over the engine's growl. His knuckles whitened on the wheel, radio clipped to his collar crackling with updates from the other vehicles. No visual on the sedan. Tunnels clear so far. But doubt laced the words. Rizzo's ram at the fence had been a feint, buying time for reinforcements. Marco nodded, pulling the burner phone from his pocket. The one Elena had slipped him, its screen now locked but humming with potential secrets. The twins sat wedged between him and her in the back seat, Luca's head against Marco's shoulder, Leo's gaze darting to the windows like a cornered animal. Their small bodies radiated heat in the chilled leather, a reminder of the miracle on the highway, breaths shared, lives reclaimed. Elena shifted, her coat damp against the seat, the clinic's antiseptic scent clinging to her like a shield. She'd chosen this, sliding into the convoy instead of fading back to her quiet apartment. Ethics tangled with the pull of Marco's world. Autonomy had always been her armor. Stitching wounds without asking whose blood it was. Repaying a debt without surrendering her soul. But the text's chill lingered. Extract or eliminate, targeting the boys who'd become her unwitting anchors tonight. "We need to ditch that phone," she murmured, leaning close enough for Marco to catch the faint floral note under the rain. "If it's pinging, they're tracking us." Marco's hand brushed hers as he took the device, the contact brief but electric, stirring the possessiveness he'd buried under layers of command. She wasn't his to claim, not like the docs or the ledgers, but the night's chaos blurred those lines, her steady hands in the clinic echoing the twins' desperate compressions. "Vito, dump it at the next junction." He powered it off first, flipping through the call log in the dim glow, numbers tied to jersey exchanges, one time stamped from the ridge during the crash. Rizzo's web, spun with Caruso's thread. The ledger weighed heavy in his lap, its coded entries now a map to betrayal. Manifests rerouted, payments to ghosts like the mechanic. The safe house loomed at the district's edge, a nondescript brick facade masking a fortified bunker, once a cold storage unit for fish hauls, now lined with reinforced doors and hidden cameras. Vito punched the access code, 6 digits, rotated monthly, into a keypad beside the roll-up bay, the gate grinding open with a metallic groan that drowned the river's murmur. The convoy surged inside, doors sealing behind them in a thunderous clang, plunging the space into the hum of emergency lights. Crates of spare parts lined the walls, but Marco knew better. Compartments for burners, safes for cash, a med kit stocked by Elena's occasional visits. They spilled out, Vito's men fanning to the perimeter, radios whispering guard rotations, floodlights sweeping the loading dock. Marco leaned on Luca for support, the boy's arm surprisingly solid, while Leo stuck to Elena, his trust in her blooming from the clinic's quiet competence. "This place holds," Marco said, scanning the shadows, the air cool and laced with the faint rot of old timber. But unease coiled tighter. The pursuing lights had vanished at the tunnels, too cleanly, like a stage diversion. Blackouts happened here, power surges from overloaded grids, but tonight it felt deliberate. Elena guided Marco to a cot in the corner alcove, its frame bolted to the concrete floor, a far cry from the clinic's sterile calm. She checked his bandages, fingers deft amid the low buzz of a portable heater. "Rest. Your lungs holding, but stress will tear you open." Her tone was clinical, but her eyes held the push-pull, independence urging her to leave, gratitude, and something warmer, rooting her here. The twins hovered nearby, Luca flipping through the ledger under a hanging bulb, its yellow light casting long shadows. "Look," he said, pointing to a smudged entry. A shipment of tires to Caruso's East Side yard, dated the same week Rizzo vanished. He was selling routes. For the kids, no. Leverage. Marco's jaw tightened, pride warring with the fear of dragging them deeper. His code, never harm the innocent, had pulled the boys from alleys, but now it chained them to his wars. A past loss flashed. His brother's body fished from the river, vows broken by a turncoat's bullet. "Smart," he replied, voice rough, "but stay close. No heroics tonight." Leo nodded, but his eyes flicked to a side door, where Vito argued in hushed tones with a guard, something about a jammed camera feed, the outer sensor glitching again. The air shifted then, a subtle hum fading, the generator stuttering, lights flickering like a heartbeat faltering. "Power dip," Vito called, but his hand went to his holster, the room plunging into half-shadows. Emergency reds kicked in, bathing the space in an eerie glow, the river's distant lap now amplified through the vents. Elena froze mid-bandage, her breath catching. Institutional limits meant no backup here, just human error or sabotage. Footsteps echoed from the loading bay. Vito's men converging, radios hissing static. "Perimeter secure," one barked, but doubt threaded the words. Marco rose, ignoring the stab in his side, pulling the twins behind a crate stack. Elena joined them, her body shielding Leo instinctively, the maternal pull overriding caution. The ledger slipped into his pocket, its secrets a ticking bomb. Outside, thunder rumbled. Not the storm's remnant, but engines, low and circling the block. Vito burst into the alcove, face etched with tension. Cameras out. Someone cut the line, deliberate. Caruso's boys, probing for weakness. He glanced at the phone Marco had tossed into a Faraday pouch earlier, now useless. "We hold till dawn, then extract to the penthouse. But if they breach..." The twins exchanged a look, their sync a silent vow amid the rising dread. Marco's hand found Elena's in the dim red, squeezing once. Loyalty forged in crisis, autonomy bending but not breaking. The safe house's walls, once a sanctuary, now pressed in like the river's unyielding current. As a distant clang echoed from the bay door, metal on metal, testing the lock. Who had jammed the feed? And were the shadows outside waiting for the lights to die completely? The red emergency lights pulsed like a failing heart, casting elongated shadows across the safe house's concrete expanse, where crates loomed like silent witnesses to the unfolding siege. The distant clang reverberated through the metal walls, a deliberate probe that set the air vibrating with tension, the faint echo mingling with the river's ceaseless murmur filtering through the vents. Marco's grip tightened on Elena's hand, his calloused fingers at anchor in the dim glow. While the twins pressed against the crate stack, their breath shallow and synced, eyes wide but unyielding. The generator's stutter had deepened to a ragged whine, the kind of mechanical falter that came from tampered fuel lines or overloaded circuits. Human error, or worse, a rival's sabotage slipped past guard rotations. Vito crouched low, his pistol drawn, motioning to two of his men who flanked the alcove, their radios hissing fragmented updates. Outer cam dead. Motion sensors glitching. Could be rain interference. But no one bought that. The drizzle had eased to a mist, and the warehouse district's grid was too crude for random blackouts. Elena's pulse thrummed in her ears, the floral trace of her shampoo clashing with the musty damp of old pallets and the sharp bite of gun oil from Vito's holster. She'd patched enough wounds in places like this to know the drill. Institutional limits meant no cavalry, just the crew's patchwork security. Cameras fed by exposed wires, doors barred but not bomb-proof. "Check the bay," Marco ordered, his voice a controlled rasp, ribs protesting as he shifted to peer over the crate. Pain lanced through him, but he shoved it down, the code etching his resolve. Protect the innocent. Hold the line even as the world frayed. The twins were his legacy, pulled from alley shadows into this fragile light. Losing them to Caruso's greed would shatter the vows he'd sworn after his brother's river-drowned end. Luca tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "The ledger, Rizzo's entry. It lists a tunnel access code. For emergencies?" The boy's voice was steady, street-honed intellect piecing clues amid the chaos. That smudged note, a 6-digit sequence tied to the east side reroutes, now a potential lifeline or trap. Vito nodded to a guard, who slipped toward the loading bay, boots silent on the grit-strewn floor. The group held breath as seconds stretched, the red lights flickering erratically, plunging corners into pitch black before snapping back. Elena released Marco's hand, her independence surging. She was no bystander, not after glimpsing that text. Slipping the Faraday pouch from his pocket, she powered on a spare burner from the safe house kit, its screen illuminating her face in a cold blue. If they're jamming signals, this might ping clean. Vito, your men's rotations. Any gaps? Her question cut through the tension, revealing her grasp on the logistics. Staggered patrols, but the blackout masked blind spots, like the service tunnel snaking under the river to the docks. A muffled thud echoed from the bay, metal yielding, then a curse over the radio. "Breach! One in! Hooded! Armed!" Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks bouncing off the walls like thunder in a bottle, muzzle flashes painting the space in staccato orange. Vito surged forward, barking, "Flank him! Twins! Stay down!" Marco pulled Luca and Leo lower, his body a shield, the air thickening with cordite and the acrid tang of spent casings. Elena crouched beside them, her mind racing through triage options. Shallow wounds first, pressure on arteries, but the chaos blurred targets from allies. A shadow darted past the alcove, too quick, too coordinated, heading for the inner safe where cash and manifests hid. Marco's eyes locked on the ledger in Luca's lap, the code glowing in his memory. "The tunnel. It's our out. Elena, you know the med cache there?" She nodded, recalling a past favor, stocking it with basics after a crew skirmish. Ambition warred with prudence in her chest. Run now, or unravel the betrayal first? Trust had always been her suspect, but the twins' fierce loyalty to Marco tugged at her, forging an unlikely bond amid the gunfire's staccato rhythm. "Leo, grab the kit," she said softly. The boy scrambling to a wall locker, his small frame dodging a ricochet that chipped concrete nearby. Vito's voice cut through. "Got him! Down!" But triumph soured quick. The intruder's hood fell back in the red light, revealing not Caruso muscle, but a face from the crew. Tommy, a dockhand who'd logged overtime on those Jersey shipments. Betrayal's sting hit Marco like a fresh crack in his ribs. Internal, festering, the kind that started with whispered offers and ended in rigged crashes. Tommy gasped, blood bubbling from his shoulder, Vito's knee pinning him. "They paid double. Said the kids were collateral. Caruso wants the roots clean." His eyes flicked to the twins, fear and greed twisting his features, a behavioral tell as clear as the ledger's ink. The generator coughed back to life sporadically, light stuttering to full, revealing the bay door ajar, rain sluicing in to pool on the floor. Outside, engines revved, more shadows circling, headlights sweeping the perimeter like searchlights on a fugitive night. Marco hauled himself up, waving off Elena's protest, the ledger clutched tight. "Vito, secure him. We're moving. Tunnel now." The group converged, Leo slinging the medkit over his shoulder, Luca inputting the code on a hidden panel behind the crates. It beeped green, a service hatch grinding open to reveal the tunnel's maw, damp concrete sloping into darkness, the river's underbelly hum vibrating the walls, laced with the drip of condensation and the faint, earthy rot of forgotten runoff. Elena led the way, flashlight from the kit cutting a beam through the gloom. her steps measured against the uneven floor slick with moisture. Marco followed with the twins, Vito dragging the bound Tommy last, his groans echoing like accusations. The tunnel narrowed, pipes overhead hissing steam from the dock's heat exchangers, the air growing heavier, pressing like the weight of suspicion. Halfway in, Elena's light caught an anomaly. Fresh scuff marks on the wall, tool scratches around a junction box, jammed feed, deliberate, tying back to the safe house blackout. "They knew this route," she said, voice echoing softly. "From the manifests Rizzo sold." Marco's hand found her shoulder in the dark, a possessive steadiness amid the pull of autonomy she felt in every step. Then we ended at the docks. No more ghosts. But as they emerged into the warehouse underbelly, the river's roar swelling, a new sound pierced. Footsteps, multiple, from the far exit. Guarded rotations bypassed, or another turncoat waiting. Vito cursed, shoving Tommy ahead as a flashlight beam lanced toward them from the shadows. The twins froze, their miracle from the crash, now a target in this subterranean vein. Who had anticipated the tunnel, and how many more in the crew were Caruso's unwitting pawns? If this tale already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more hidden stories to light. The tunnel's damp chill clung to their skin like a second layer of betrayal, the concrete walls slick with condensation that dripped in erratic rhythms, echoing the unsteady pulse of the river above. Elena's flashlight beam sliced through the murk, illuminating the scuff marks and fresh scratches that confirmed the sabotage. Wires nicked just enough to glitch the feeds without raising alarms, a low-tech trick any dockhand could pull. Her breath came in measured draws, the air heavy with the earthy rot of stagnant water and the faint metallic tang of rust from exposed rebar. Behind her, Marco's steps faltered slightly, his bandaged ribs grinding with each movement. But he pressed on, one arm looped around Luca's shoulders, the other steadying Leo. The twins moved in their uncanny sync, small shadows navigating the gloom as if born to it, their alley-honed instincts sharper than the crew's radios. Vito brought up the rear, his free hand clamped on Tommy's bound wrists, the dockhand's labored breaths rasping like gravel under boot heels. Tommy's confession hung in the confined space, a toxic fog. Double pay from Caruso, the twins as leverage to force Marco's hand on the river routes. "It was just business," Tommy muttered, voice muffled by the tunnel's echo, but Marco shot back without turning. "Business ends when it touches family." The code burned in his words, never harm the innocent. A vow etched from his brother's bloated corpse pulled from the same river years ago, now tested by these fractures in his empire. Possessiveness surged through him, not just for the dock's ledgers, but for the fragile unit he'd forged. The boys who'd breathed life back into him, Elena's quiet strength threading through the chaos. The footsteps ahead grew distinct, multiple sets, boots scraping concrete, low murmurs cut by the slap of water from a leaking pipe. Elena killed the light, plunging them into near blackness, her heart hammering against her ribs. Institutional limits screamed in her mind. No backup signals here, just the tunnel's natural acoustics betraying their position, human error amplified by the rival's anticipation. 2, maybe 3, she whispered, pressing against the wall, the rough surface biting into her coat. Marco pulled the twins down, his body a barrier, the ledger's weight in his pocket, a reminder of the investigative thread unraveling. Rizzo's codes, Tommy's slips, all pointing to a deeper rot in the crew. Ambition versus prudence warred in his chest. Expose the turncoats now, or extract clean and rebuild. Vito shoved Tommy forward into the dimness, using him as a shield. "Who sent you?" he growled, pistol pressing into the dockhand's back. Tommy stumbled, chains rattling. Caruso's lieutenant, Sal, said the boss's miracle kids were the key. Spot 'em, grab 'em, end the routes fight. The words landed like punches, the twins tensing under Marco's arms, Luca's whisper fierce. "We ain't bait." Leo nodded, eyes glinting in the faint glow from the exit ahead, their bond a defiant anchor amid the rising dread. Elena's hand found Marco's in the dark. A brief squeeze. Autonomy bending to the shared stake. Her ethics demanding she shield these boys who'd mirrored her own buried vulnerabilities. The far exit loomed, a grated door half ajar, spilling sodium light from the warehouse beyond, where the river's roar swelled into a thunderous backdrop. Shadows shifted. 3 figures, hooded and armed, silhouetted against stacks of crates and the hulking forms of loading forklifts, their radios crackling with static bursts. One turned, spotting the movement, and barked into his comm. "Tunnel breach. Rossi's in." Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the walls with deafening pings, sparks dancing like fireflies in the mist. Vito fired back, the muzzle flash illuminating Tommy's terrified face before a stray round clipped his leg, sending him crumpling with a wet thud. "Go!" Marco roared, shoving the twins toward Elena, who bolted through the grate, the medkit banging against her thigh. They spilled into the warehouse proper, a cavernous space reeking of brine and engine grease. The river visible through massive bay doors cracked open to the night, its black waters churning under dock lights. Rain misted in, carrying the chill bite of the storm's tail end, puddles reflecting the chaos as the intruders poured from the tunnel. Marco grabbed a fallen pipe from a pallet, improvised, heavy, swinging it to cover their retreat, the clang echoing like a war drum. Vito dragged himself up, favoring his grazed arm, covering the rear with precise shots that dropped one shadow in a heap. "They're pinning us. Convoys jammed at the access road, roadblock ahead," he shouted, piecing the logistics, staged diversions, burner relays feeding false trails. Elena herded the twins behind a forklift, its diesel-scented bulk a flimsy shield, her mind racing through triage, Vito's arm bleeding steady, Marco's ribs at risk of reopening. "Hold pressure," she called, tearing a strip from the kit, but the boys were already moving, Luca spotting a control panel on the wall. Access codes from the ledger, for emergency overrides. His fingers flew over the keys, 6 digits, the same as the tunnel, unlocking a side conveyor that rumbled to life, belts whirring as crates shifted, creating a barrier of tumbling cargo. Leo grabbed a flare from the med kit, striking it to life. The red bloom cut through the gloom, blinding the pursuers momentarily, buying seconds in the hazardous sprawl. Marco lunged to join them, pipe discarded for a scavenged crowbar, his swings fueled by the raw fear of loss. The twins' miracle now a beacon drawing Caruso's wolves. One intruder broke through, lunging at Elena, but she sidestepped, ethics yielding to survival as she drove a knee into his gut, the medkit's handle cracking against his skull. He went down groaning, but more footsteps pounded from the docks outside, reinforcements, engines revving in the distance, the environment turning lethal with jammed exits and the river's treacherous edge. "The water, it's our out," Marco panted, spotting a gangway leading to a moored barge, its deck slick and shadowed. But as Vito fired a warning shot, the radio crackled again. "Boss, it's Sal. Your own blood called it in. Legacy ends tonight." The words froze them, betrayal's knife twisting deeper. Sal, Marco's cousin, the one who'd shared childhood vows by the river, now trading family for power. Human conflict boiled. Loyalty versus fear, the code fracturing under ambition's weight. Elena pulled Leo close, her voice steady. "We swim if we have to. Together." The twins nodded, their small hands linking with hers and Marco's, a found family forged in the warehouse's roar. But as bullets whined past and the barge's ropes creaked in the wind, a new shadow detached from the crates. Not enemy, but Vito's man, waving frantically. "Clear path, east tunnel, but it's flooding fast." The river's current surged through a breached grate, water rising ankle-deep, cold and insistent. Who had tipped Sal, and could they outrun the flood before the docks became their grave? Water surged through the breached grate with a guttural roar, ankle-deep and rising fast, carrying the river's icy bite and the gritty slurry of silt and debris. The warehouse floor transformed into a treacherous mire, puddles merging into shallow streams that tugged at boots and swirled around the twins' legs, the chill seeping through denim like needles. Elena's flashlight beam danced erratically over the chaos, illuminating the breached grate's jagged edges. Sabotaged, no doubt, by Sal's hand or one of his pawns, turning the dock's natural flood risks into a weapon. The air thickened with the briny reek of the river invading, mingling with cordite smoke and the metallic tang of blood from Vito's grazed arm, now wrapped in a hasty bandage from the med kit. Marco's breath came in sharp bursts, ribs screaming as he scooped Leo into his arms, the boy's slight weight, a grounding force amid the swirl. Luca clung to Elena's side, his small hand gripping her coat, eyes locked on the gangway to the barge, slippery planks swaying under the wind's howl, ropes creaking like warnings. "The east tunnel's our shot," Marco rasped, nodding to Vito's man waving from the shadows, his face slick with sweat and rain. But the water climbed to calves now, cold current pulling at their footing, the environment itself a hostile ally to the intruders still firing from the crates. Bullets whined overhead, pinging off forklift frames, one grazing the conveyor belt that the twins had jury-rigged, sparks hissing into the flood. Vito hauled Tommy upright, using the dockhand as a human shield despite his limp, pistol jammed into the man's ribs. "Move! Sal's blocking the barge, 2 boats incoming from the east." His radio crackled again, static-laced voices reporting jammed roads and a perimeter lockdown, the logistics of betrayal closing like a noose. Burner pings rerouted, guard rotations compromised by whispers of double pay. Elena pushed forward, water sloshing to her knees, the medkit heavy on her back. Autonomy clashed with the fierce pull of this makeshift family. The twins' unyielding trust. Marco's code wrapping around her like the river's current. "Vito, cover the rear. We hit the tunnel before it drowns," she called, her voice cutting through the din, clinical precision masking the fear knotting her gut. The group plunged toward the east side, the warehouse's vast space narrowing to a gauntlet of pallets and machinery half submerged, shadows twisting under the stuttering sodium lights. Leo buried his face in Marco's neck, but Luca darted ahead, ledger clutched like a talisman, spotting the tunnel access amid the gloom. A low hatch half flooded, its code panel flickering from the power surges. "The override, now!" Marco barked, setting Leo down as Luca punched in the sequence from the ledger's smudged page. The hatch groaned open, water gushing inward, but it held. A narrow passage sloping downward, the river's underbelly throbbing through the walls like a living threat. Gunfire chased them, Sal's voice booming from the gangway. "Cousin, legacy's a fool's game. Hand over the roots, and the kids walk." The words sliced deeper than any bullet. Betrayal's raw edge honed by shared blood. A past of boyhood promises by the riverbank now drowned in ambition. Marco paused at the hatch, water lapping at his waist, turning to face the silhouette on the barge. Sal, broad and unyielding, flanked by hooded figures on a second skiff motoring closer, engines churning foam. "You tipped him!" Marco snarled at Tommy, who whimpered under Vito's grip. The dockhand nodded, eyes hollow. "Sal." He knew about the crash, said the twins were the miracle that'd break you. Caruso's orders. Extract them for leverage, or eliminate if you fought. The revelation hit like the flood's full force. The threat wasn't random sabotage, but a calculated purge, organized from within, Sal's fear of fading power twisting loyalty into a blade. Marco's code fractured under the weight, vows kept, but at what cost? He fired a single shot from Vito's spare pistol, the crack echoing as Sal ducked, the bullet splintering wood. "No innocence," Marco growled, shoving the twins into the tunnel first, Elena following with a nod of grim resolve. Vito dragged Tommy in last, the hatch slamming shut behind them, muffling the gunfire to a dull thud. But victory's price mounted. Vito's arm bled freely now, soaking the water red, and Marco's vision blurred from the pain, a rib piercing something vital with every step. The tunnel became a race against submersion, water rising to thighs, the current pulling like grasping hands, pipes overhead groaning under pressure from the river's swell. Elena supported Luca, her arm around his waist, the boy's determination a spark in the dark. "We saved you once. We'll make it again," he panted, echoing their highway miracle. Leo echoed the sink, helping Vito despite his size, the group linked in a chain of trust forged from crisis. Sensory assault overwhelmed. The slap of waves against concrete, the chill numbing limbs, the faint hum of distant generators fading as the flood claimed the space. They burst from the tunnel's far end into a maintenance shed on the river's quieter bank, collapsing onto dry gravel as the hatch seal held, just barely. The water's roar receding to a muffled threat. Dawn's first gray light filtered through cracks, illuminating the cost. Vito slumped against a wall, Elena triaging his wound with trembling hands, the med kit nearly spent. Marco pulled the twins close, his embrace fierce, possessiveness yielding to the deeper truth. They'd protected each other, autonomy and code intertwining into something unbreakable. Sal's boats circled futilely in the distance, the flood buying them escape, but exposure loomed. Manifests seized later would reshape the docks, sacrifices etched in scars and lost loyalties. As the convoy, delayed but loyal, rumbled up the access road, Marco met Elena's eyes, the river's mist veiling them like a vow. "The treasure wasn't the routes," he said quietly, voice steady despite the pain. "It was this, us, holding through the dark." She nodded, hand on his, the twins leaning in, a found family born from breaths shared and betrayals survived. The adventure's weight lingered, loyalty and memory outshining raw power, transformation sealed in the quiet after the storm. But as Sal's silhouette faded into the fog, one question whispered on the wind. With the empire cracked, what new shadows would rise from the river's depths? Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of loyalty, danger, and found family. See you in the next story.